Hello, I am InMo Yang, and I'm delighted to be interviewing my teacher, Miss Miriam Fried, as part of the Violin Channel Hero Series. Miss Fried, thank you so much for making time for this.
My pleasure. It's nice to see you again.
Yes, nice to see you. First of all, how have you been? How do you spend your time during this time of uncertainty?
Well, luckily we still have our job, and so I am teaching. It's totally different kind of teaching, but I have been teaching um, actually ever since the lockdown started. And I must confess that being on Zoom most of my life is not
Mm.
an ideal situation. Some days I even imagine that I'm going to just go right into the little square and disappear into the machine, never be heard from again. But, we make do with whatever there is. And so it's been more or less okay. The summer programs, of course, all were
Mm.
also canceled. And so, we had to scramble to remake the Staines Institute program,
Right.
which was a lot of work and actually fun work. So
Mm.
professionally, I think things for those of us who teach have not been in such an upheaval. But of course,
Mm.
for our profession, it's a very different story. It's very sad to not be able to perform. And of
Right.
course, I haven't performed at all since March. Well, with the exception of a few little online things that I did, but
Mm.
that is not a good substitute. So
Right.
it's uncertain and unfortunate, but nothing we can do about it.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of musicians these days miss playing on stage, playing for others, and making music together. And a lot of us are kind of frustrated and don't really know what to do. Could you maybe tell us if there was any moment in your career that made you think, this is why music matters? This is why I do this? Moments that really confirmed your passion and love of music?
It's interesting. I don't think that I can pinpoint a moment. I um, I actually cannot think of a moment in my life when music wasn't part of it.
Mm.
I really remember myself as a little girl, not playing anything yet, and hearing my mother play and hearing her students play. And I remember having very distinct opinions about what pieces I liked better and what I
Yeah.
didn't. And then when I started playing myself, the my love of music has been a constant, I think. In all of my life, there's never been a time when I wondered whether that commitment was there. Sometimes I wasn't sure whether I wanted to be traveling or playing concerts, but that music was part of me that had to just be there, or else I wasn't the same person. That was never a question.
Mm, I see. Um, I'm also curious about the influences that affected your perspective, your vision of music and the world. Who are the people that you admire, and what do you admire about them?
Well, I think I admire a lot of people, and I was very, very lucky to meet some very significant musicians at a very young age, and to be introduced to them when I was very impressionable, like children, literally a child, children are. And I would say that one of the most impressive people
Mm.
that I met in music was Isaac Stern. In addition to being a great artist and in addition to being a larger than life person, he taught me that it wasn't only about music, that it was really about the role of music in society.
Mm.
And what place does music have in society? And what is our responsibility as musicians in society and to society? And I think that, by example, he really was a mover and shaker, and certainly saved Carnegie Hall and was active in creating foundations in Israel to help young musicians, and helped others in many different ways. By this example, he taught me that not only is this a desirable thing to do, but it's also possible to do,
Mm,
you know excuse me. And so I really think that that was something that I started thinking about at a very young age. But of course, other people that were very influential in my life as a musician were my teachers.
mm,
And, I couldn't possibly um, not give uh, a lot of things to my first teacher, who is not famous, not a household word, but was really my musical mother. And Alice Fenivesh was her name. She came from Budapest. I studied with her in Israel, and she instilled in me the passion for music and the understanding that violin playing was a tool to serve music and not the other way around.
mm,
And I will forever be grateful to her. She introduced me to the greatest music when I was probably too young and had no business playing those pieces, but it made me excited. And I remember when I first got my Beethoven sonata, and I remember when I was assigned a Bach piece, and I really, to this day, remember the occasions because it was so monumental. And she taught me really to have this passion for the music. Then I studied with Lauren Fenivish, who many will have known, and he taught me to look at music in an analytical way and to look at violin playing in an analytical way. So he really combined the passion for music with this very analytical approach. And, I think he taught me how to think about music,
mm,
how to think, what to think about, and how to do it. Um, and then came Joseph Gingold, who, with his absolutely boundless love for the violin, you know, taught me that. And, from him, I learned to appreciate the idea that beauty of sound
mm,
and music go together. And I think that when I think of violin playing, often his sound is in my ear, and that's what I think about.
mm,
So these were people who were really important in my development, and I think that the other thing that I learned actually from all three of them was that um, generosity of spirit when you teach
mm,
makes the student more able and willing
mm,
to receive the information that you give. I really believe in that firmly,
mm,
that there is no need for um, any kind of coercion or anger um, or meanness, to put it
mm,
bluntly. That you do better when things are generously presented to you rather
mm,
than when you're threatened. And all three of them were incredibly generous people and giving people, and I think I learned that from them.
mm.
And I I believe in it firmly.
Yeah. Since you mentioned Isaac Stern, what was his sound like? I'm sure you went to many of his concerts.
Oh, I certainly did. His sound was very personal, like the sound of many of the violinists there
Mm,
in that time, and it was very strong, like him.
mm,
I would say that that was one impression that one would have, but it was incredibly full and rich also.
mm.
Yeah,
I see.
very much so.
Yeah. If you could travel with a time machine and have dinner with one of the composers, who would you like to meet and what would you like to know about him or her?
Well, it's hard to narrow it down to one. You know, I would probably say Bach and Beethoven,
Yeah.
you know, and the only thing is that I would be a little scared of meeting Beethoven. I think I wouldn't be scared of meeting Bach. I
Mm,
have enormous admiration for Bach, but I don't think it was scary. You know, I think Beethoven might have been.
mm,
Um, what I would want to know from Bach would be all of the things that we can't figure out. You
mm,
know, how come he wrote the Bach, the longest fugue of his whole volume of music for
mm,
the violin, which is so poorly suited to play
mm,
fugues, for example, you know. And how come it works? That's the thing that, you know, I keep thinking about it and it doesn't make any sense because it shouldn't work, but it does. It works great. And, you know, did he know that? Did he think about it actually? Or did it just happen like that? You know, I mean, it's literally the longest fugue that he ever wrote. And here he wrote fugues for orchestra, you know, for the organ, which could have, you know, different colors to the sound, etc. You know, the violin is really very poorly suited for it, and yet he wrote a monumental work. How did it happen? You know, and I mean, I probably would have wanted to know more about the process of his thinking as well, because
mm,
as I was reading about Bach quite a lot, I
mm,
realized that we know almost nothing about him.
mm,
I mean, yeah, we know that he had two wives, and we know that they had 20 children, and we know how many of them survived, and we know where he had his jobs and when he fought about getting more paper to write the music on, etc. But we basically don't really know much else about him. You know, what motivated him to make the decisions that he made? You know, that I would love to know. Because
mm,
about Beethoven, we know quite a lot because
yeah.
he told, you know,
Mm,
Beethoven, I just would have liked to meet the person simply because he seems to me truly larger than life. You
mm,
know, and I mean, I would have just wanted to witness that.
mhm,
You know, I mean, I did a lot of reading this summer actually about Beethoven, and that was the impression, you know, my goodness. I mean, that is not a man, that's a giant, you know,
mm,
in every way, in absolutely every way. And a man who didn't get along with people and didn't even get along with himself, frankly, you know, but had so much to give, so such an unbelievable amount to give.
mm. Yeah. Speaking of Bach, we know that you recently devoted yourself to studying Bach, and I'm curious, when did your fascination with Bach began, and what this whole project of yours meant to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said before, my teacher, my first teacher, assigned me pieces probably earlier than I should have been playing them. So, for example, I played the Bach E major concerto in concert at the age of 10. Now, if you started at 4, then that would have meant that you played, you know, for 6 years, but I didn't. I started at 8,
Mm,
you know, and I played the Bach concerto at the age of 10, and at the age of 11, I played the E major partita, you know, and so this was part of my childhood.
mm,
I grew up with this music. I played all of the sonatas by the time I was 16, you know, and sonatas and partitas. And I think I have loved them always,
mm,
you know, and so my interest in it changed with the times. You know, when I was 10 years old, nobody dreamt of the Baroque movement. You know, this was just
mm,
not something that anybody thought
right.
about. Maybe somebody thought about it, but we didn't know, you know. Then, you know, so the first time that I played these pieces, you know, was in the tradition that was of the time, you know, quite in the romantic fashion, you know, rather slow and rather heavy because that's how the understanding of the pieces was. And so then, since then, we have evolved in many, many ways, you know, and so the beginnings of the interest in authentic Baroque performance were in the early 60s.
Mm,
And then, you know, things evolved in the thinking about that as well. And I kind of grew up with it, you know. And so every time I decided to play all of them again, I was in a different phase of this evolution. And so little by little, I started rethinking tempos, for example.
mm,
Then I started thinking about, well, should I actually try the Baroque bow? I must confess, I never was really tempted to try the setting of the low tuning of the A because
mm,
I can't switch. I
yeah,
mean, my ear just can't do it, you know, so that would have driven me totally crazy. So I did not think of doing that, but I did think about doing the bow. And so in the 80s, I borrowed a Baroque bow and I played with a Baroque bow for
mm,
a while and I loved it.
mm,
I really did, but it wasn't mine and I had to give it back. So I did, and that was the end of that. And I never thought about it again until the next time when I started thinking about, yeah, maybe it's time for me to play them again. And that was when I decided that it was time for me to get a Baroque bow and really, you know, just play this
mm,
music with a Baroque bow because it really does give you an insight about at least what Bach had to work with.
mm,
Whether he would have chosen to use a modern bow or not, we will never know. He
mm.
didn't have that option. And so, you
Right.
know, maybe he would have. No, in fact, almost for sure he would have, but he didn't, you
Mm,
know. And so this is a moot conversation as far as I'm concerned. What is interesting is what did he hear and what did he know about violin playing, being a good violinist himself, that motivated him to write this and that and the other, you know, and that had to do with the Baroque bow. And so
mm,
I never make my students play with the Baroque bow. I recommend that they try it, you know, but for me, that was a real revelation, and it enabled me to play in tempos that make the music much lighter and dance movements all of a sudden can dance,
mm,
you know. And so this was it was really an evolution, you know. And so the last time I did it, it was just another one of the times that I did it, you know. That was actually the idea behind it was this was my 70th birthday present to myself, you
mhm.
know. So I spent a lot of time thinking about it and doing it, practicing it and recording it again.
Right. I see. Is there anything that you're obsessed with other than music and potato chips? Remember, this is
um,
online channel we're talking
I
about.
hope I'm not obsessed with potato chips. I would say obsessed with music, that's fine, but with potato chips, not so much. Um, I don't think there's anything I'm obsessed with, but there are things that I love to do. You know, I mean, I love to read, I love to knit, actually, and
Mm,
I love to cook. And my
mm,
God, COVID made us cook. You know, that was the one thing that we find in common between all of us. You know, we all have cooked more than ever before, and
mm.
probably after too.
Yeah. Did you try some new recipes during COVID?
Oh my God, yes. Oh, many, many, many.
Yeah. Can you give us
Yeah.
an example?
Oh, an example. Well, I mean, I make up a lot of my own recipes. So, I mean, you know,
Mm,
yesterday, you know, I wanted to make a soup for a friend who was ill and we were going to visit. And so whatever was in the house, that was the soup that I
mm.
made, you know. So basically, I couldn't even tell you what it's called. But, you know, I've tried different nationalities. I actually tried Korean food. I
Oh.
did, and I got some ingredients, you know, but I've tried all kinds, really, you know, just I love to read recipes. So if I read something that I find interesting, I try it. And, you know, we decided that it was healthy and a good idea to become vegetarian, at least part-time. And so I've done a lot of
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
Oh, I see. I also wanted to ask you a little bit about teaching. You had a big career as a soloist. You've won international competitions. You've toured around the world with great orchestras. And at one point, you decided to devote yourself to teaching. How did it feel to you to transition into being more of an educator,
Mhm.
and why is teaching important to you?
Well, I mean, it didn't happen quite like that. I didn't stop playing and start teaching. I started teaching very little, actually.
Mm,
So, and my starting to teach coincided with my younger son going to school.
mm,
Until then, there was no way that I could possibly be a mother and travel in the world and teach. That would have been just impossible. And so once my younger son went to school and he was gone for, whatever, 8:30 till 3 or something every day, that gave me a chunk of time where I could actually devote myself somewhat to teaching. And so I started in a very limited fashion.
mm,
um, it was just a combination of things. They asked me if I was interested, and we had just decided to purchase my violin, and so the income was useful, but it wasn't something that I planned. It just happened,
mm,
and I was very happy that it happened. I think um, when I talk about giving back and contributing something, this is part of it. I think that playing concerts is doing something for people. There's no question about it.
mm,
It's a form of generous communication with an audience, and sharing something that one is passionate about. But I think teaching is a different version of giving, and it is, sharing with people who are of the same mindset or very similar mindset, at least, the things that and my kind of joking way of describing it is that, yes, of course you would learn from making all the mistakes and fixing them, but you don't have to make all the mistakes in the world. I can help you prevent some of them by teaching, and so I really feel that giving that information that I gathered is something that is my responsibility,
mm,
and so that was the motivation for doing it. And so I really went from teaching a little to teaching more to teaching full time and continuing to practice to perform, and even having a string quartet to add to that. And then little by little, as I got older, my desire to be superwoman and to do everything possible is decreased, I would say.
mm,
And so, the major part of what I do is really, being a teacher. And I love it. I
mm,
mean, I really do. I mean, I love the opportunity to share whatever it is that I love with other people who love the same thing.
mm,
I love the idea that I can help them, solve problems faster,
mm,
because I trust that people probably would figure out how to do it themselves too. But, this is a faster way of doing it.
mm,
And I love to see how my students develop and go out in the world and become wonderful, contributing members of, this profession and society. I think that if COVID did one thing for me at least, it's reinforced my feeling that we musicians need to be musician citizens,
mm,
and we have to care for our environment, not only my musical environment, but all of our environment. And we have to contribute to making it a better place to the best of our ability, and of course, it's probably with music because that's what we know best. But,
mm,
I mean, teaching children that don't have access or bringing music to venues that are not the most likely venues to have music, or anything that we can do to make this place a better place, we
mm,
have the responsibility of doing.
mm. I think by that you already kind of answered what I was going to ask you next. But what what would you really like to see in a young musician? Because we live in a highly competitive world where opportunities are limited, and I'm sure a lot of young musicians like myself, um, we often think how to make a career, how to maintain it, and how to find the right platform to fulfill our passion. Do you have any general advice for us? What do you expect from the younger generations to achieve?
I think that everybody has the responsibility to pursue their dreams. And I
Mm,
always tell people dream big, because
mm,
if you don't dream big, you'll accomplish nothing. It's necessary. And, if your dream is to be a soloist, then for a while it is okay if you're just going to be a soloist because it takes time and a lot of effort to develop that. And so it's perfectly fine. But we have different phases in our lives.
mm,
You don't have to do everything simultaneously. You can devote some of your life to performing, you can devote some of your life to teaching, and then you do have the responsibility of being a citizen of this world and to see what is necessary. I would not presume to tell everybody what they need to do. I think that would be really unnecessary and presumptuous. But I would say, look around you and see what's necessary. And the thing is that I think it could inspire you to come up with interesting and innovative ideas of how you could share music with other people. And so there isn't just the one way. But if your dream at a very young age, as you get out of school, is to be a soloist, that's what you must pursue.
mm,
Because if you don't, you're not going to get there. That's for sure. Dream big and be willing to put hard work, a lot of imagination, and a lot of legwork into
mm,
and be optimistic. I
mm,
think that being pessimistic is a terrible way of going into the world,
mm.
and there's always the glass. Is it half full or half
Right.
empty? See the half full part. I think it's really, really an important thing to
Mm,
remember.
mm, yeah. And finally, what is the first thing that you like to do when this pandemic is over?
Oh, I know that. Hug my grandchildren. Oh my God, it's really terrible not
Mm,
to be able to see the family.
right.
Just awful.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for sharing your experience and insight with us. I hope you stay healthy and entertained until I have the chance to see you next. Um,
I look forward to that very much.
yeah,
Yes.
thank you
And
so
we
much
should
for,
all keep healthy for sure.
right. Thank you so much for doing this interview with me.
A pleasure. A
Okay,
pleasure.
that was my interview with Miss Miriam Fried. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye.